131 bestsellers, millions of copies sold. But there is a brutal truth to writing a book, and that is that most books end up nowhere. So, why is this? It's because writing a book does not actually equal success. It is the message behind the book, and it is the marketing behind a book, as well as the know how of what you're actually doing that would create a bestseller. And today, I have the man who's going to show us what it means to create a bestseller. How do we do it? What does that road look like? And stay till the end because we actually have the solution for you to this whole thing. So, Michael, welcome to A Mindset Medicine. I'm really happy to have you here today.
It's my real honor and pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Catherine.
So, I was so intrigued by what it is that you do and how you help people do it. But what I would love is always to go back and okay, so how have you helped 131 books become bestsellers? Because that's a huge, um, I would say like notch, right, in your resume to say that you've helped 131 books become bestsellers and uh, turn that into millions of copies sold. So how does one even get to that point?
So I think just as a little backstory on that, when I was 17, I decided to run away from home with a girl up to Washington State. I'm from Utah, and we were homeless and we sold drugs and whatever else that homeless kids do on the streets. And I decided I was there because I want to be with a girl, not because I had something bad at home or was an addict or anything. And so after about a year of that, I'm like, yeah, I don't really like this lifestyle and moved back home at my mom's. So to start off with, I'm a high school dropout because of that. And my next job was as a manager of Burger King. Well, while I was managing a Burger King, I met a young lady who was a student at Brigham Young University, and we got married. And she said to me, Michael, you're too smart to manage a Burger King. You got to go get a different job. So she helped me find a job at a company called Executive Excellence, which then was a division of the Covey Leadership Center before it merged with Franklin and became Franklin Covey. And they had this magazine that they sold to corporations and to executives called Executive Excellence.
Mm.
And so I worked there for 3 months. And in the first 3 months, I became the number 3 salesperson in that organization. Now, that's only significant because the then 1, 2, and 4, and 5 salespeople had been there for more than 5 years and were just renewing subscriptions. So I, as a salesperson, was generating new revenue that the company hadn't been generating. And this was back in 97, 98. And when that happened, the merger between Franklin and Covey occurred, and Ken Shelton, the executive editor of the magazine, was given the magazine as payment for ghostwriting 7 Habits of Highly Effective People for Stephen R. Covey. And so when that happened, Ken came to me and he said, hey, Mike, we publish all these great authors in our magazines. Why don't we start publishing their books? And as a young, naive 18-year-old, I'm like, sure, let's do that. And so we set up the book division for the company, and we started publishing books. And in that first year, I failed miserably, but I learned a lot about the book publishing industry. I figured out how to do client acquisition, contracts, how to get distribution. We got a distributor, how to work with the distributor, how to work with the retailers to put books on the shelves. And I worked diligently to understand the inner workings of publishing to be able to have a successful publishing company. Well, like I said, I would say that I would be a failure if you looked at the outcomes that I created during that first year, but I impressed some pretty important people in the industry. And our distributor for the publishing company was NBN, National Book Network. And our sales rep, the publisher rep that represented our publisher and 10 other publishers, was a woman by the name of Miriam Bass. Miriam Bass is a legend in book publishing. She was the first woman to be a buyer at a retail chain. But when I met her, she was the publisher rep at National Book Network. Well, she also was the publisher rep for another company out of Austin, Texas, called Bard Press, BARD. And after I worked at Executive Excellence for a year, Ray Bard came off of a huge success with his book, Not Southwest Airlines' Crazy Recipe for Success. And he told Miriam, hey, I want to expand what we're doing. Do you know anybody that can help in marketing so that we can run more big campaigns like we were running here? So Miriam recommended this young kid out of Provo, Utah. Ray interviewed me and hired me. And the first day on the job, Ray said to me, Michael, we publish business authors. What our authors want more than anything else in the world is to be a New York Times bestseller.
Mm.
What I want you to do is to go figure out how those lists works. And as a young, naive, then 19-year-old, I'm like, sure, I could do that. And funny enough, what I literally did was I got the names of the people at the New York Times, Business Week, USA Today, and Wall Street Journal, and who compiled the list. And I called them on the phone. And I said, hey, how does your bestseller list work? And I was too young and naive to know that I shouldn't do that. And they all laughed at me to one degree or another, but said, hey, kid, that's fun. Let's build a relationship, keep calling back. And so that's what I did. I started building a relationship with those folks and gleaning off what information I could from them about the functionality of their list. Well, the first book I worked on for Ray Bard was by marketing legend Roy H. Williams. Roy H. Williams owns an organization called, Williams Marketing, and he's known as the Wizard of Ads.
Yes.
Um, right?
I've
And you
got his
probably know
books right here.
got his books. In fact, you're probably, given that you're in Canada, you probably know one of his biggest clients, Spence Jewelers, right? He took Spence Jewelers from a $500,000 company to $500 million company.
Mhm.
And most everyone in Canada, whether they like the ads or hate the ads, they're very
Yep,
familiar with Spence,
absolutely.
right? So I worked on Secret Formulas of the Wizard of Ads by Roy H. Williams. And the strategy that I developed for Roy was to mail an advance copy of the book to the general manager of every radio station in the country, in North America, US and Canada, with an offer. This was back, mind you, back in 99.
Hmm.
And so the offer was, if you buy 20 copies of this book and run 200 radio ads promoting the book, we're going to give you a training. This was on VHS back then,
Uh-huh.
a training library from Roy H. Williams that will train your sales reps on how to use the book to be able to generate more clients. Because the book
Fascinating.
advocates what Roy does, which is radio. He believes that for smaller, medium-sized businesses, radio is the best form of advertising.
Mm.
And so we had, out of a couple thousand radio stations in North America, 867 of them participated in the offer.
Wow.
We launched the book to number 3 on the New York Times and number 1 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller. And that was the start of my career in publishing and how I figured out the bestseller list, which has now led to 131 consecutive New York Times, Wall Street Journal success and USA Today bestsellers.
Fascinating. Um, what I would love to know is, because you have now been doing this for how many years?
Going on 27.
27 years. Therefore, you have seen the way that book publishing is done has likely changed, how it's being marketed, how you're putting it together. Um, what would you say is sort of differentiates one company from another? We see we're in the age of AI right now, right? And technology and so on. Before I go all the way there,
Yeah.
what I'm wondering is, there's so many companies that don't seem to evolve with the times, right? So we see that there is a new way of doing something, but they're so used to their old ways that they're like, yeah, but why would we change what works?
Right.
So when you've been working for these companies, and because you were younger, right, and you don't know what you don't know, did you ever come to that point where you had ideas where you were getting pushback because they were so set in their ways, but you're this young kid who's got so much energy? We're like, well, why don't we try this?
The obvious answer is yes, of course. In fact, I today I'm people love or hate me in the industry because I push everybody to the extreme that it can get to. But let me give your audience kind of a back story on that. Between 1880 to 1980, the average number of books published each year was 40,000 new titles. The average retail bookstore carries on average 100,000 unique titles. Of those 100,000, between 70 to 80%, so 70 to 80,000, are what we call backlist titles, which are your perennials, your classics, and last year's bestsellers. So between 1880 and 1980 in the United States, most of the books, three-fourths of the books that were published, made it onto a retail bookstore shelf.
Mhm.
So the market availability was very high. It also used to be that publishers did they basically owned what we would call or define today as the platform of the author. They would go and set up all of the media. They would go and set up the speaking gigs for the author. They would do all of the things that would be that would we would define as a platform, and they would take a percentage of that. They would take a percentage of book sales. They oftentimes they were tied with multimedia conglomerates, so radio shows, TV shows, spin-offs, like all sorts of other revenue models would come from that, that they would have a piece of. But in 1980, this little device called the personal computer
Mm.
became massively popular throughout the United States and throughout the world. And what the personal computer did is it allowed anybody with proper word processing to be able to create a book. So which is great. I think everybody has a story and has a voice and should share it. That being said, not everybody is a great writer.
Yeah.
So what happened is that the market then stayed through the mid 90s as it had the previous 100 years, but the volume of books published increased. And
Mm-hmm.
so what publishers started moving away from was doing all of the marketing and the PR and the speaking events and all those things because they simply couldn't do it anymore. And they couldn't afford to take a risk on books.
Right.
So by the time I started in the industry in 1997, 98, there were 79,000 books published in that year, right? And so that would have doubled from
Yeah.
1880 to 1980 within that 27-year or 17-year time frame.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in 98 to 99, there were 119,000 books published. In 99 to 2000, there were 230,000 books published.
Wow.
Last year, there were 1,076,000 books published
Wow.
that have ISBNs. They estimate another 3 to 4 million self-published books that we don't have eyes to be able to see in the industry.
Wow.
So what's occurred is there's been a huge confluence of additional books being written with the attempt to be published. The retailers haven't increased the size of their stores.
Yes.
And they're not going to increase what we call frontlist titles, which are new titles, because those are speculative, but the backlist titles are the ones that continually sell. So there's still this limitation on the number of books that you can put on retail shelves. And so what publishers have become more and more and more reliant upon is the platform of the author that they're bringing to the table. Publishers no longer do marketing and PR. They have divisions. They certainly have their celebrity. New York houses have their celebrity authors, their politicians, or the musicians or movie stars or whomever that are known by the masses. But for the rest of the books, they don't do any marketing or PR, right? And so the big change that's happened is that the onus for promotion has been put back on the author. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The truth is today, based on the way that the industry works, publishers are only making money when they sell books, right? So they're not making money in any other capacity. And the truth is, if you work with any traditional publisher, not a hybrid publisher, but a traditional publisher, they're making less per unit sold than the author's making in royalty. When you take out basically, I'll give you some high level numbers. If you take a $20 book, the retailers they're going to take 55% of the retail price of the book.
Right.
So that means they're going to take $11. So now what can go back to the publisher is $9. But then the publisher at New York House, as an example, has sales reps they pay commission to. So they're going to make 3 to 5%. The medium-sized publishers with distributors like MBN that I mentioned earlier, they're going to pay 13 to 15% to those. So let's say there's an average of 10% off the retail price of the book. So now you're going from 9 to 7, right? What then most authors don't know is that every book that is a frontlist title that is on the retail shelves is paid for by the publisher. This is called co-op. So every single frontlist title you see is paid for. So if it's spine out, it's $1 per unit. If it's face out, it's $2 per unit. If it's at the end cap, it's $3 per unit. If it's at the table at the front of the store, it's $4 per unit. If it's in a special display or if it's at the point of purchase, it's $5 per unit. And that's for normal stores like Books A Million or Barnes & Noble or Indigo or Chapters. But if you then go to the airport stores like Hudson's, those rates double. And those co-op fees are paid whether the book sells or not. So now
Ah,
you go from $7, let's say the average co-op price is 3. So now you're down to $4 per unit of available revenue. And one of the important things to note from a publisher standpoint is that books are 100% returnable by the retailer to the publisher. So if the books don't sell, they're
right,
getting that inventory back and they're not making money and they have a cost associated with that.
right.
And the reason the publishers or the retailers do this is so that from one season to the next, they can replace the current front list titles with new front list titles so that we can get those 20 to 30,000 titles on the shelf, right? That's how they actually are able to get that inventory turn is
Yeah.
by replacing the front list titles, which,
Mm,
which if you can get on the shelf is what you want. So you're now at $4. Those pesky authors, they want to make a royalty, they want to make something, and typically speaking, it's going to be at 10 to 20%. So they're going to make about between $1 and $2 per unit sold. So now the publisher is down to $2 profit per unit sold, and that doesn't include shipping and overhead and editing and design and all of those other things. So there's
right.
just not the available revenue within a book for a publisher to do anything more than edit, design, print, and distribute, pay for that distribution. The very best thing that you can get from a publisher is their distribution support. Does
Mm,
that make sense? And so within that system, then the people that really dictate the industry is not the publishers, but the retailers. How do we convince the retailers to be able to bring in copies of your book? Well,
right.
first of all, if you're self-published, you're eliminated because they're
Yep.
not. There's one buyer at Barnes and Noble who does all the business books and one that does all the personal development books, right? And they only have so many hours. Only so many publishers or distributors can present
Yes.
them from a
Hmm.
sales standpoint. But then imagine the accounting side of it, right? A New York publisher who puts many books into Barnes and Noble and has them returned, they have cash flow going back and forth between Barnes and Noble and the publisher. If the publisher doesn't make sure that the retailer Barnes and Noble is making their proper cut, if they're not taking the returns properly, Barnes and Noble is not going to carry their books. If you, as a self-published author, try to do that, if they put 1,000 books at Barnes and Noble and the book doesn't sell, and they go to return the books and get the funds back from you, and you don't have the funds to pay them, well, Barnes and Noble is going to lose. So they don't, from an accounting standpoint, on that side, let alone the marketing side, they just don't work with the
Mm,
individual authors or independently published
right.
publishers. So then that means that if you go self-publishing, the opportunity is definitionally limited in what you could do because you're not getting retail distribution. And oh, by the way, when we talk about bestseller, how do you become a bestseller? The retailers report sales to the New York Times and the other lists. You don't. Your publisher doesn't. It's the retailers. So if you don't have retail distribution, no matter the size of your platform, no matter what you can do from a marketing standpoint, you cannot be a New York Times, USA Today, or Success bestselling author because you can't put sales through those retailers in a high enough volume to qualify for those lists. So
Right.
what we then look at is how do we work with an author with a platform to either work with a traditional publisher or what are called hybrid publishers. In both of those models, they both have access directly to the retailers and to be able to put books on the shelf. So then what we do is we put our publisher hat on and pardon me, our retailer hat on, and we think about what do the retailers need in order to
Mm,
be able to bring in books? Well, the retailers again work under a risk mitigation model. That model allows them to return books. And what they're looking at is revenue per square inch in the stores.
hmm.
So it's one of the reasons they charge co-op. And by the way, you can't get front list distribution without paying the co-op because everybody offers it on every book. It is just a minimum requirement to be able to get that shelf space. So um, the retailers then use a grading algorithm to determine how many copies of a given title they're going to carry. They look at number one, how well did the author's last book sell at my stores?
Mm,
Number two, how well does the average book by this publisher sell at my stores? Three, how well does the average book in this category sell at my stores? Based on the answer to those three questions, the book gets a grade of A, B, C, D, or F. And that grade level determines the number of books on shelves per store. So F means no books. D might mean 1 to 3 units per store. C might mean 5 to 10. B might mean 10 to 25, A might mean 25 to 100, right?
Hmm.
Some every retailer is a slightly different number, but that
Hmm.
kind of gives you the range for what they're looking at in terms of aligning the grade to the books on shelves.
Yeah.
And so by rule, the retailers can only increase the buyer, the person who's applying the system, can only increase your grade by one level if they really like the book or like the marketing. So F to D, D to C, C to B,
Yeah.
or B to A. But there's no incentive for them to do more than that. In fact, there's a D incentive. So what happens is if your book gets a grade of D and you want Barnes and Noble to carry B level numbers at their stores, that's two grade levels above. Well, if the buyer likes the book and likes the marketing and says, "Cool, we're going to give this book B level distribution," if the book doesn't sell at the expected volume that a B level book would sell at, guess what the buyer risks? Losing his or her job, right?
Mm,
So there's no incentive to take a risk on a title because they like it. They don't want to risk they don't want to risk their job.
mm,
And on the positive side, if the book does sell at B level numbers, well, they're going to pat on the back, right?
right.
There's no financial incentive to them to take a risk on a given title.
Right.
And so what we look at then is how do we give them the ammunition and the security and safety to be able to increase the shelf space by guaranteeing them sales, which ties into when we get into the New York Times, ties into those campaigns because we guarantee sales when we run those campaigns to the retailers as part of securing that shelf space, right? Because if we know we want B-level distribution and we have marketing that is great, that will create sell-through, and we can then guarantee on top of that, hey, we're going to give you B-level sales guaranteed. So you bring in the books, there's no risk. Then we mitigate the risk and they bring it in. But at the end of the day, it's the retailers that are really running the industry. So back to the original question about changes in the industry. Yeah, there's been massive changes in the industry. The industry is really slow in movement. And the biggest thing that hasn't changed that makes it most difficult in this day and age is the retail component of marketing a book. And many people say, well, what about Amazon? Aren't they the biggest? Don't they make up the majority of sales? Well, they are the biggest. Amazon represented last year 16.6% of all books sold. That's great. Barnes& and Noble, the second biggest retailer for book sales, sold 11.1% of all books sold. So 50% less than what Amazon sold. So Amazon's the biggest.
Mm,
But when you take Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com and Books.com and all of the online sales of books, and you
mm,
add everything together, both digital and print books through all digital assets online, it represents about 24.4% of all books sold online. What that means is a little more than 75% of books are still sold through brick and mortar stores,
oh, isn't that interesting?
right? So if you want success, the place that you have to get the book to is the retailers, not just from a
Right.
bestseller standpoint, but from an availability to your market. You've got to get it on the shelf. And if you don't do that, you're missing out on a huge percentage of your audience. And also, you decrease the efficiency and efficacy of the marketing because if the book's not available and people are hearing you doing marketing, seeing emails, or hearing you on TV or radio or whatever the media that you're using, and they go into the store and it's not available, they don't see it, the probability of them buying the book decreases
Mm,
dramatically. And
interesting.
so the changes, there are more books being published this year than ever before, competing for the same amount of shelf space that
Right.
they did in the past, putting the pressure on publishers to act like VCs, venture capitalists, looking for authors who have proven that they
Yes.
know their market and
Yeah.
that they have an existing audience and
Yeah.
that distribution will that they'll be able to leverage that with distribution to generate sales, and then to convince the retailers that this book is a book that's going to sell off of their shelves. And so that's really where the state of the industry is. And if there's going to be a major change in the industry, it's going to be at the retail level.
Mm. This is fascinating. So that brings me to my next big question. How on earth does someone figure out that recipe um, to get that book into the retail space? You know what this kind of reminds me of? It's like Shark Tank, right? Like you've got this idea and you go in front of these people who are going to help determine whether your idea even makes sense to lead to something that will actually make money. So here's my first question then. One of my first questions as we dig a little bit deeper into this is, what is the difference between a book that gets published successfully and that book that really falls off to the side and gets forgotten? Is there something magical that the one has compared to the other? You know, we talk about like, well, how does that athlete become the star? How does that person become the actor or actress? Or that business idea turns into, whatever that ridiculous business idea turns into and goes viral. How does this happen with a book?
So there's two parts of your question. One is a publishing industry answer, about the way that the industry works. And in order to really traverse that, you need an expert like me to be able to do that. But that doesn't necessitate success necessarily, right? Success is specific to the individual. One of the things that most marketers do is that they're really tacticians, and their single tactic, there is their end all be all thing. Everybody needs to do this tactic. It'll change your business and your life, right? A book is a tactic. So what I do with my clients, because of the size and scope of the campaigns that we run, is I say, this isn't about the book. This is about your business. So let's step back and let's do what you would do in any other business setting, which is, let's first define the outcome. What outcome is it that we're trying to accomplish for your business? Then let's define the measurement metric that we use to know that we've accomplished that outcome. Then we define strategy. And then from strategy, the strategy dictates what tactics are necessary to be able to fulfill the strategy, which is meant to fulfill the measurement of the outcome, right? And so, um, from my perspective, more important than the book is the defining and measurement of the outcome, and then the strategy, and then the tactic. I have a publishing client right now. She's a publisher, and she works with visionary investors, and they use their books to raise money. She's raised, in the last couple of years, $200 million for clients using books. None of those books sold more than 500 copies.
Mm,
So the measurement, the outcome of success was raising money. It wasn't
right.
having commercial success with the book.
Hmm.
So again, when you define that outcome and measurement, you could then let the book marketing strategy accomplish whatever that is, and the tactics go below it. So it may be like in this example, where we don't care about retail shelf space, we don't care about bestseller. What we care about is the tactical use of getting books to the potential investors of those investor companies,
Mm.
to invest money. And so she did that very, very successfully. So that's where I would start. How do we define and measure success? And then strategy, and then tactic. If it makes sense from an outcome standpoint that we want to play the retail game, okay, cool. Now there's a set of rules that we have to follow. I've gone
Mm.
through some of those on this
Yeah.
call.
Hmm.
But those are tactical elements tied to the strategy.
So here's my question as you're talking. So you're at a party, right? You're at dinner or something, a dinner party, whole bunch of people are around. This person finds out what you do. They say, "Oh my gosh, I've always wanted to write a book." I mean, I can't imagine how many times you've heard this, right? We've all heard it. So when you hear that from someone and they're serious when they say it to you, what is your response to that? Because I don't, from what I hear, maybe I'm wrong, but from what I'm hearing from you is the days of just sitting around thinking, "Oh, I think I'm just going to write a book," are kind of on their way out unless you're doing it as a hobby and you just want to get your message out to the world, but you're not getting it into one of the major bookstores when you're kind of doing it like that, if I'm not wrong.
No, that's a totally fair assessment. It was possible for you to be a hobby author and get distribution between 1880 and 1980. That is no longer going to happen. unless you're a celebrity, and then it's because of the celebrity. The publishing industry is based on platforms. So celebrity has a platform that comes with it.
Mm,
So if you're the average person doing it as a hobby, no, that's gone. You have to do it with intent if that's the objective. So normally, I encourage everybody to write books, whether they can play a big game or a small game. I think that one of my clients, Garrett Gunnarsson, wrote a book titled "Killing Sacred Cows." He's a wealth management guy. It was about killing the secret house of wealth management. Anyway, he has a philosophy that he applies with his clients, which he calls soul purpose, SOUL purpose. And he applies it in marketing in that once you define what your soul purpose is, you should only invest into companies that reflect that soul
yes.
purpose.
Uh-huh.
But in our context, soul purpose, as defined by Garrett, is given to every single one of us. All of our talent, skills, and experiences, and the lens through which we view the world and respond is based on that sole purpose. And
Mm-hmm.
that sole purpose isn't given to us for us, it's given to us for the service of our fellow man.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're here to serve each other. And so the experiences that you have, the stories that you have, are not given to you for you. They're given to you to share with other people. So I encourage everybody to share their stories and to write and to publish, even if it's just for the sake of getting it out there, even if it's just publishing and giving it to family and friends. It's important to be able to take your stories and experiences and share and support other people, right? So the first thing I do is I always listen to what they're doing, because I think everybody has an important and valid story to tell, right?
Mm,
So part of it's listening. But the next thing I ask is what I just stated a moment ago, which is, okay, if the book were successful, if I handed you a magic wand and you waved it and the book accomplished something, what is it that we've accomplished, and
mm-hmm.
how measure that we've accomplished that thing,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And so at that point, it becomes very clear whether it's a hobby or whether it's their next business or
Yes.
whether it's tied into something that they're doing right
What's the
now.
purpose? Right.
Yep. So that is what I listen for, because what I don't want to do is I don't like what other marketers do. They sell hope like it's crack cocaine.
Mm,
No, there is a way to be successful in publishing. The way to that success is not something that everybody can do, nor
mm,
should, right? And I don't want to give them the belief, oh yeah, let's get your book published and take you to your publisher and get you published. Not only can I not do that in most cases, it's not the right thing to say. I work diligently to talk to people to fetter their expectations to what they can do with the book, to what their outcome is and what they're bringing to the table, right? Most folks should write, should get it out, but they're not able to play at the other higher levels, and that's fine.
So as you talk about this, I want to give people a little bit of hope. So because it sounds as though um, if I don't have a very large platform, I will never get into one of the bookstores. What I'm wondering is, are there exceptions? And have you seen exceptions
So,
to this?
no and yes.
Okay.
Let me say it from this standpoint. You could look at a book like the book series 50 Shades of Grey. 50 Shades of Grey would be an exception, except that it wasn't. And here's why.
Hmm.
50 Shades of Grey was fan fiction to the Twilight series. Most people don't know that, but it was fan fiction to the Twilight series.
Interesting.
And the author of 50 Shades of Grey published the ebook within the fandom and fan groups online for Twilight. And that author had built a big following and relationship with the people in that community. So the
Fascinating.
platform existed, and
Yes.
they leveraged the platform,
Yes.
and they created a huge interest in the 50 Shades of Grey book, to where they were selling 100,000 copies of the ebook at $1 a pop every single week for like a year. And then a New York publisher said, oh, let's put this out on the shelf, right?
Mm,
So it's an exception, but it's not. It's an exception that the author didn't own the platform, that they created content that happened to work in someone else's platform. But the platform existed. There was a pre-existing platform that was used and leveraged to be able to build the following, to be able to eventually get the book on the shelf.
mhm.
So it really boils down to that platform. It's your need for your business, but also in terms of marketing, I think, is based on that platform. You have to build that platform. And so what can be done, and what we often advocate for our clients, is I'll be transparent with this. Most of our authors don't run a bestseller campaign until their third to fifth book. There are exceptions to this,
Hmm.
but it usually takes three to five books. And the reason for that is we have to build up their platform
Yes.
to be sufficiently large
Yeah.
to support the needs of the industry to be able to get the distribution and create the sell-through. And so it takes a little bit of time, even with an existing business,
Mm-hmm.
to build the platform in a place to where we're ready to go and take a shot at the New York Times and other lists.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that those first two books were failures. In fact, they weren't. An example would be most people know Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Life. What most people don't realize is that he wrote a book before that, published a decade before, titled The Purpose-Driven Church. And
Mm.
that book was not a commercial success, but it was one that was a platform success. What he did is he had a copy of that sent to every evangelical pastor in North America, along with Sunday talk notes based on the book, so that it would make it easy for pastors to use the instructions and purpose of a church to write all of their Sunday speech talks,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he did that, and the content for purpose-driven church promoted the concept of the purpose-driven life. And so all of those pastors who had their own small individual platforms started using this and promoting the purpose-driven life concepts to their audiences.
Right.
And then when he came out with the book, everybody was already familiar with them, right?
Right.
They were already
Right.
familiar
Yeah.
with Rick
Yeah.
Warren and
So establishing credibility,
yep.
right?
But also its credibility with those individual pastors that were doing it. But having that weekly exposure
Mm.
of his content to those people, it's the most brilliant thing you can do. You're embedding these ideas on an ongoing basis consistently. He had not only reach with those pastors, he had repetition. And that's one of the things that a lot of people forget about, is that it's not just the reach of the message. It's there's three things when you look at marketing. You've got impact quotient, reach, and frequency. And he had deep impact quotient because of what he was doing with the pastors. He had great reach because of those pastors, and the frequency was exceptionally high. And so, of course, it's going to translate, leveraging all of those smaller platforms with the launch of the Purpose-Driven Life.
Interesting. So where do you see this going? Where do you see the book publishing industry and how it would evolve as we keep going, more with digital, more with AI? Some people think that, a lot of the in-book or in-store sales probably might diminish and they will increase more online. I don't know. What do you think about all that?
So funny enough, about a decade ago, I made a bet with my first bestselling author, my mentor, Roy Williams, that within the decade that we would see ebooks selling more in volume than print sales. And I was wrong. I was massively, dramatically wrong. The total volume of ebook sales is around 25% of in terms of volume, not revenue, but in terms of
Mhm.
volume. And so, yeah, it's there. It actually, what was interesting, over COVID, it got up to about 28%. And
Yes.
then after COVID, it dropped back
Hmm.
down to
Hmm.
23, 25%. So right now, we're not seeing an increase in digital sales. So here's the thing about it, is that the younger generation, folks under 25, aren't reading books at all.
I literally was going to be my next question.
They're
Yes.
not reading books at all. So you're
Yeah.
dealing those that do read are the older audience that have an experience, a visceral experience,
Yes.
holding a book, flipping its pages, smelling it.
Yes.
Like there's a visceral experience. I can't tell you the number of people say, I tried ebooks, but I really just didn't enjoy having a Kindle Kobo or Nook at the beach and reading books that way. Like it's just not, it doesn't
Yes.
have the same visceral experience for that older
Yes.
audience.
Hmm.
And so we have to look at the fact that the older audience is probably going to stay where they're at, and that we're not going to see much increase in adoption of digital within the audience. So then you go back to the other part of the audience that's under 25. And so one of the things that I observe to my clients when we build out platforms and books is that publishing, for me, publishing isn't a book. Publishing is taking an idea from behind the firewall, in this case, the firewall of your mind, and making it available to someone else to consume.
Hmm.
There are many ways to consume ideas that are presented outside of the firewall of your mind. A book is one.
Hmm.
Online trading is another. Live events is another. Coaching is another. There's a lot of mediums in which you could present the content, the same content that you would in a book,
Hmm.
that would appeal to the younger audience and would appeal to other older audiences as well in the format. The other thing that's really important to note, this is especially true on nonfiction, but retention of new information is between 7 to 11%. So if I read a book, my retention, and even if you're really smart, that your highest amount of retention is going to be about 11% of that material.
Yeah.
So being able to present the same content in multiple different formats doesn't actually create the problem that folks might say, well, aren't people, if they see it in video, they've read the book, they're going to complain about it? No. Because what happens is if they read the book first, they watch the video, they'll be familiar with the parts that they recall or remember that they retain. It's like, oh, that's really familiar. So it'll actually cement those ideas with them even further, and they'll then gain new additional understanding based on that different format of the material. And
Hmm.
so the good news for those who want to be published is that the modeling for publishing and the modeling for building a platform are now almost identical,
Interesting.
right? So for me, publishing a blog post is equally as much as publishing a book. Publishing a podcast is a short form of content you find in a book. In fact, one of the models that we do with our clients, whether it's at our book retreat or whether it's through a program called Platform in a Box, is we'll do an outline of a book. And at the end of the outline process, what we like to do with Platform in a Box is take that book outline, throw the author, the business owner in studio, and then based on the outline, interview them and have them answer very specific questions about all of the topics within the book. And then what we do is we take that and turn that into 64 videos, which can be used for training or online programs, or can be put out onto YouTube as a vlog. And then we pull out, serve out the audio, and we create podcast segments, and then we transcribe that and edit that into blog posts. And then we pull out social media posts and meme quotes and create all of that. And then we take the written content and we edit that back into a book. So now we're using the same content in an efficient format to be able to have that content published in multiple different formats and multiple different lengths to be able to meet the customer, the reader, the audience member who needs the information, to meet them where they're at.
Hmm. Really good. Um, so I didn't realize we've been on for so long. This has been really fascinating. I've loved learning about this, and I'm sure the people who are listening have as well. So it sounds to me like if someone wants to go down the road of writing a book, or, they've got their big idea and they want to do something with it, having someone to guide them and mentor them in doing this would be the smartest decision for them, because it is no longer simply sit down, write a book, and I'm just going to, and it's going to get published. For the amount of books that you said are now out there, and which I'm sure incrementally or exponentially will just keep growing. Um, what is the solution then for them? So I have a great idea, and I'm thinking that I want to create a book for 2026, for example. What should I do?
So there are two parts of your question. And the first part is what was regarding having the right person to work with that'll help you through that process. I want to give the bigger business context of that, because this is not just true in books, but I would say more broadly in life as well. About 20 years ago, my first best-selling author, Rach Williams, who also co-authored with me our New York Times bestseller, Pendulum: How Past Generations Shape Our Present and Predict Our Future. We were walking the streets of New York after Book Expo America. Book Expo America was canceled around COVID, but it used to be the biggest book industry trade conference in the world. And anyway, we were in New York, walking around the streets of New York, talking, and he pulls me aside and Roy says, Michael, the winners and losers in life are determined when the teams are picked. There are two teams that are essential for your success. The first are the team of people who select you to be on their team, and the second are those you select to be on your team, right? And so with that in mind, I would suggest that everybody should support those that they want to be on their teams, but then have the right teams around them
Mhm.
that support their objectives as well. The reality is that each one of us are experts in a finite category. I'm an expert in book publishing and bestseller campaigns, right? That's my niche. But I'm not an expert in accounting.
Mhm.
I'm not an expert in operations. There's a lot of while I can write, I'm not an expert at writing. I have expert writers on my staff, right? I surround myself with people who are experts at the things that I am not an expert at
Mhm.
because I cannot possibly do all of those things. So I would advocate the same for all of your listeners that they surround themselves, that they focus on their one thing. One of the books I worked on was by Gary Keller, Jay Papp, entitled The One Thing. It's one of it's the best-selling business book of the last decade and one of the top 10 of all times. And in the book, what they argue is that we all have one thing that we do really well and that we should focus on that. And I agree with that. We should find our one thing, do that one thing, and then surround ourselves with the people that their one thing supports our one thing
Yes.
in
Mhm.
areas that we don't have that sole purpose and expertise around.
Yep.
And so I would start with making sure that you've got the right team around you, not just in terms of marketing, but business strategy and all of those other things. Because as I stated earlier, the place you start with all of this is outcome. How do you define outcome? Then what's the measurement metric? Then strategy, then tactic. Um, the second part of your question is how do we how do we get started? What do we do? I do have a bias. I have a bias towards books for a reason, which is just another quick story for you. I was a publisher for 7 years. When I left being a publisher, the first year out, I worked with seven really big names to make them New York Times bestsellers. Every single book made the New York Times bestseller, and I can tell you that three of them were not happy. Now, they weren't unhappy because I didn't deliver what I said. I delivered exactly what I said I would deliver.
Mhm.
They weren't happy because they had an expectation that the bestseller and that marketing would have very specific outcomes to their business, which it didn't. As a publisher, what I didn't understand was fully understand was the use of the book by the business to grow the business. That wasn't my responsibility. My responsibility as a publisher
Mhm.
was to make sure that we dotted the I's, crossed the T's, maximized the distribution, got the books to the right retailers in the right time frame for compliance, and that we made the bestseller list. It was much more mechanical. But when I started my own agency, what I realized in that first year was that there were two parts of this. One was the mechanics of publishing and working within that. The other was the use of the book by the author in the growth of their business. And so what I became then was a student of business platforms and marketing platforms so that I could understand when a client came to me um, that how to leverage their platform in not only the success of the book, but also in the success of their business. The adage is to a hammer everything is a nail, but the reality is that what is needed for all of these folks is outcome measurement, strategy, and tactic. And
Mhm.
so understanding how all of those things work together is really critical. So then, to your question, for me, a book when done properly, can be an amazing tool that helps to flesh out a platform. It's why our in-studio service is called Platform in a Box, because we're able to create so many elements of the platform tied to that subject matter, that content for that book,
Mhm.
so that we're able to more easily tie in the book promotion into the platform, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Mhm.
So for me, my bias is from a platform standpoint, the use of books. My bias from a book standpoint is that it opens up doors and creates opportunities and is repurposable for platform that it's an amazing tool. So I would look at the starting of this from a platform standpoint, from a business standpoint. What outcome are you trying to create for the business?
Mhm.
How do we measure that? Strategically, what kind of book and marketing campaign would support that outcome? Right now, let's look at based on that, what type of tactics we need to deploy in order to be able to fulfill on that strategy, right?
So, for anyone who's listening and they love everything that you've said, they totally understand that they cannot do this on their own, and that getting guidance is utmost important to them. Um, you offer something that it sounds really good and very interesting, which I think would interest most people who are thinking that they might like to get their idea out. And whichever way they choose to do that, having someone help them do that is important. So, what is it that you do? And explain a little bit about that.
So obviously, what I'm known for is promoting 131 books, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Success, USA Today, and bestseller list. And second to that, we build platforms. But one of my clients, T. Harv Eker, he wrote a book titled Secrets of the Millionaire Mind. We put #1 on the New York Times a number of years ago. And a few years after we ran that campaign, I was sitting with T. Harv, and he said, Mike, what you do for clients like me is amazing. You've really you make a difference for us, and we're able to expand our platform and impact the lives of loads of folks, and that's really amazing. And he said, keep doing that work. But he said there are a lot of people in the world that are also making a difference, that are out there serving others, and whose voices need to be heard, who can't afford to run this level of campaign. You need to figure out how to be able to go serve those same folks. And so this was a number of years ago. And so what I was developing at the time was a book outlining process for myself, actually. I suffer from 26 learning disabilities and a couple of different forms of dyslexia. And so reading and writing is actually not an easy thing for me to do. And so I have to work out new models. And I was developing a model for me to write, to do my own content creation and writing. And I created a model that allowed me to do that. That I found not only applicable for me, but made writing very easy for most. And so over the years, we've taken that outlining process and developed it into a codified step-by-step process whereby I could take anyone, sit them down for a couple of hours, and extract from the right hemisphere of their brain an exceptionally detailed outline. And this is true for anyone. Everybody who goes through this process has a book that comes out. Why? Because the process shuts down the left hemisphere of the brain, gets you into a state of flow, and you do a controlled brain dump from the right hemisphere of the brain, which is all about pattern recognition, right? And we get into paper like, cool, this is theirs, this is yours, based on what you know, what your right hemisphere is telling you. And from there, once that logicking, once that thinking is done, it's very easy to be able to then write the content. And so most of us, including myself, are not natural writers, but we're storytellers. We are given sole purpose, again, to serve each other. And so we're not writers. So our objective then is to get those ideas down on a paper in a controlled fashion. Hemingway said, there's no such thing as a good writer, only a good editor. And so what we do with our platform at a box service is, as I mentioned earlier, is we take this outline and then interview you to be able to get it out. And then we turn it into the videos and podcasts and blogs and social media posts and memes and all of that. It's a fairly expensive program because of all of those things. But we then have taken that and we now do a book retreat, a month-long book retreat in Guatemala at a place called Lake Atitlan, which is a really beautiful lake from a super volcano that's was clogged up 100,000 years ago. That's now a lake, and it's they don't know how deep it goes because it's so close to the mantle of the earth that they can't send machines down to the bottom of the lake to see how far it gets without melting. Anyway, we do the retreat there, and we go through the outlining process with our students during the first week to fully flesh it out. And because most of us aren't writers, that outlining process gets all the logic out. Well, once that's all out, it's very easy then to say, cool, I know chapter 1, topic A, we know what the big idea is, we know what the story is, we know what the nuts and bolts are, we know what the hope is. Okay, cool. Now just write the big idea, right? Like expand on that. You've given me 2 lines on the story. Now actually tell me the story. Okay. We know what was learned from that story. Now flesh that out into actionable steps for your reader. Okay, now we know what the hope is. And so the idea is that we are able to take folks iteratively through one micro step at a time in the writing of their content. And at the end of the retreat, my team then my team then takes the raw manuscript and edits that into a book.
Wow.
The analogy that I would use in terms of our writing style takes me back to when I was like 11. I used to deliver a paper route in Provo to BYU students, Brigham Young University students. And I met a gentleman there who was a track star. His name was Soa Marley. And he was from Ghana. He was a prince from a tribe in Ghana. And he was like 19, I was 11. We became friends. And he invited me over, this was back in 1991, to watch an American football bowl game for the college season. BYU against Texas A&M. And so I went over to his house. And when I got there, he had this big giant metal bowl of popcorn. And he said, how long do you think it's going to take you to eat that bowl of popcorn? I'm like, that's too much popcorn. There's no way I'm going to finish the whole bowl of popcorn. Well, Sure enough, 4.5 hours later, when the game had ended, the bowl of popcorn was empty. And he asked me, "Well, I thought you couldn't eat the bowl of popcorn. How'd you do it?" I said, I don't know. He's like, "I'll tell you how you did it. You did it one kernel at a time."
Mm-hmm.
Right. You didn't look at the whole bowl and eat the whole thing. You ate one, you didn't pay attention, you did one kernel at a time. Well, our book writing process at the retreat follows that same model. Once we get the outline done, it's just one kernel, one bite at a time. And we've got it timed out so that at the end of the retreat, the entirety of that book is done.
That's phenomenal. What a great process and in a great location, right? Because
Absolutely.
it's a place where you can just go and download, right? Like everything, because your mind is also clear when you're in environments like that.
Yeah. Like, the reason I chose Guatemala is that it's known for its earthquakes and volcanoes, but the way it's situated, especially when you're not at the beach, is such that it's very low humidity in land. So when we're at like acid land, which is a former super volcano, um, we're able to be at the lake, low humidity, looking out in the distance, 50, 100, 200 miles out, watching other volcanoes explode. Quick backstory. Lake Atitlan is why Guatemala is known as the land of volcanoes and earthquakes, because it was for millions of years, the only volcanic place in Guatemala. And when it got clogged up, the earth still needed the release valve for all of its steam, so to speak. And so all of the other volcanoes in Guatemala popped up as relief valves to the clogging of Lake Atitlan. And of course, the earthquakes also happened because of that. And so you sit on the crater of this volcano, which is now a lake, looking out to volcanoes in the distance that are erupting with low humidity, and writing all day. And of course, all of my clients are business owners, and so there's great internet and great self-service there, so they're able to both write their book and manage their business as well. So it's
Phenomenal.
it's a really amazing experience. And again, at the end of the day, we're able to help people write and finish their book, and then we edit and design, do the book cover, the internal design. And what's really great for those that go to the retreat is we have several publishers who we have agreements with who are lined up to publish the retreat attendees' books.
Wow. So, does it run once a year or more than once a year?
It depends on the year. I've got a lot of things going on. We did it once last year. We did it twice the previous year. The year before that, we did it 3 times.
Oh,
So
wow. Okay.
this year, we're looking at doing it again in September. My objective is to make it regularly in the spring and in the fall, like a February, March, because
Mhm.
it's in the tropics. The average temperature in Guatemala is 72 degrees year round.
Mhm.
And so it's a great time to do it in February, March, or when it's starting to get cold later in the year.
So,
So this year we'll do it in
how
September,
can
but
so anyone who's listening, who finds this utterly fascinating and like a wonderful opportunity, where can they find out more information, contact you, all of that information?
cool. So if they want to do the book retreat, I try to keep things really simple. So the website is bookretreat.com, bookretreat.com,
Hmm.
right? And we've got lots of information about the retreat, past retreats, and what we do. If your listener is at a point where like, hey, I have a platform, I can and would like to play at the New York Times level, our website is promoteabook.com. My email, anybody's welcome to email me, is michael@promoteabook.com, promoteabook.com. Again, I like to keep things simple. What do we do? We promote books. So promoteabook.com.
Perfect.
So those are the best ways to get a hold of me.
Perfect. And I'm going to put all of those in the links below for anyone who's either listening or watching this on YouTube. This has been fascinating. I have really enjoyed this conversation. One last thing. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you feel would be an important part of this interview?
Well, so there's lots of things that we didn't get into. As an example, we didn't get into the New York Times bestsellers list. Like I would love to be able to explain to your audience how that works and how it works in the industry and the rules and all of that. We haven't talked about. We can delve more into platform building, and into the psychology of readers, and buyers of books and what they're going through in consideration. Like there's a lot of things that we can go into that we didn't have time for in this call that I'd love to be able to to come back and chat with your audience about. But those are probably their own 30, 40, 50-minute call themselves.
So then
Um,
maybe what we can do is we can actually schedule in a month from now and do a part 2 to this. So everyone who's watching, put a yes, I am going to be here for part 2 next month so we can actually learn in more detail all of the, the nitty gritty of let's actually get into this a little bit more and what they need to know about that.
Yeah, but that's a great idea. Let me give you one more value add for your audience. I have a white paper that I've written titled "How to Publish a Best-Selling Book." So on today's interview, we went through a lot of the details of how the industry works, and
Mhm.
so again, retention 7 to 11%. The white paper goes through in great detail, explaining that. It also goes through in great detail to explain the roles and responsibilities of authors and publishers and PR firms and distributors and retailers so that it could properly set the contextual understanding of what publishing a book is and specifically publishing a best-selling book. So if you allow, I'd love to be able to give that to you to be able to share with your audience.
Absolutely.
That will give a lot of insight supportive of our interview today.
Perfect. Well, we'll add that in the link below as well. So it's full of goodies today. And stay tuned. If you have any questions, look up Michael. All his contact information will be below, and as well as his website, the little gift that he's going to be leaving us, and then join us for part 2 in about a month from now, where we will get into more details. Because if you are really thinking about this, and I know so many people do, so many people feel as though they have a story, they have an idea, they really want to get out there, then I think part 2 will be really interesting to continue this conversation and give you a little more insight into how all this works. So, Michael, thank you for joining me. Thanks for hanging out with me today on Mindset Medicine. Remember, every step you take toward building a resilient mindset and creating harmony in your life will get you closer to your dreams and that transformation that you've been looking for. If today's episode hit home for you, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your feedback is our fuel. Spread the love. Share this podcast with friends and family. Tag me on Instagram at Catherine Lukedu Coaching. And if you're looking for more tips and resources, head over to catherinelukeducoaching.com. Stay connected, stay inspired, and keep living your very best life with harmony and purpose. And until next time, my friends, live boldly with purpose.